Greetings to those of you who support this humble channel, and thank you for all the views and subscriptions thus far. It is yet another week of retro gaming nostalgia and random ass fun facts about the wild shit that happens on our planet throughout recorded history, featuring one of my favorite fighting game titles of all time, The King of Fighters 2002, which I'm actually pretty good at playing, like for real. I swear on the graves of all my ancestors this time.
I don't believe you. What?
Except for when it comes to fighting the main boss Rugal. Rugal is an absolute piece of shit.
Come on, man, what the fuck is you doing, cuz?
Oh, and also Chrysalid. He's another asshole. Now, it must be noted that while the KOF series has been around for some time, dating all the way back to the mid-90s with the first being King of Fighters 94, it wasn't the first appearance of the many beloved characters of this fighting game franchise, with majority of them originally being handpicked from various other games that fall under the developer and publisher SNK Playmore's banner. Some good examples of these characters are that of Andy and Terry Bogard, along with Joe Higashi, Geese Howard and Mai Shiranui, being from the original Fatal Fury series of games, and Robert Garcia as well as Ryo Sakazaki being from the Art of Fighting franchise. The KOF series has been one of SNK's most popular video game IPs, and even now still continues to shine in its own unique way despite being in the shadow of other popular franchises like Tekken, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, with the most recent release being King of Fighters 15 from the year 2018, as well as another Fatal Fury game in early of 2025. Fun fact though, that the character of Robert Garcia was parodied by Capcom in the form of the joke character Dan, after SNK basically ripped off Ken when they created Ryo Sakazaki in the first Art of Fighting game.
Oh my god! Wow!
KOF 2002 initially released in, well, the year 2002 for arcades and consoles, would in 2009 get re-released for 7th generation consoles such as the Xbox 360 and PS3, as well as for PC via Steam, as King of Fighters 2002 Unlimited Match. So, as you can see by the footage I have recorded here, I'm mostly playing with female characters, except for Bao, who I just found out recently is male.
Yeah, we love the gays. I mean, I am LGBT. I
shout
am
to the-
bisexual. I am the
Big man
B.
ting. Shout out to the LGBTQ
Yes.
PS5 HDMI, bruv. Big
Well,
man ting. Love it.
Go us.
This is dry, bruv.
Japan, you sneaky bastards. The main reason for this, however, is because today's topic centers around the 20th century trend of using women radio hosts for propaganda during times of war, as a sort of sexy psyops, if you will. The strange thing being though, that in most cases, instead of demoralizing the enemy, it just turned them into a bunch of horny simps. This is probably where the whole ASMR thing started, isn't it?
don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Psyops, or psychological warfare, has been a concept that has existed since ancient times. I mean, in terms of practicality and trying to demoralize the enemy, to break their will to fight, cause disunity among their ranks, or force them to surrender has always been a go-to tactic since war has existed. And this said tactic could manifest in many different forms, but the most common type would be through the use of propaganda.
When I will grow up, I will be army and save Pakistan and destroy India. Strong army, war, great!
The modern incarnation of Psyops, however, can date back to the very start of the 20th century and the First World War, and over the decades has evolved as both battlefield strategies and military technology has progressed and changed. During both world wars, as well as throughout the rest of the 1900s, very common methods included the distribution of leaflets, propaganda in newspapers, spy networks, secret agents that would engage in feeding false information to an enemy or spreading disunity among their ranks, and eventually even through films, television, and radio broadcasts, with today's most effective method being through social media and the internet. However, today we will take a look at 5 historical figures who were all women and who served as propaganda radio broadcasters in some of the 20th century's most brutal and destructive conflicts.
American GI. Your mama's so fat she can block out the sun, and your dick so limp you have to put in the freezer to get hard.
The Second World War to this day stands as one of humanity's most violent and destructive conflicts to take place in such a short period of time. Over the course of 5 years from 1939 to 1945, and ending with the collapse of Germany and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. The war started in Europe after Hitler and his Nationalist Socialist Party, or Nazis for short, came to power with the ambitious goal of rebuilding the German Empire, which fell after World War I, deciding to invade many countries across Western and Eastern Europe, as well as parts of North Africa, and on the other side of the world, Japan, with its own colonial ambitions, which had already been rampaging all over the Pacific since the late 1800s, finally set its power-hungry sights on a very weakened China, which it invaded in 1937, but who also made the massive error in deciding to bomb the absolute shit out of an American airbase called Pearl Harbor in 1941, which in turn brought the entire might of the US war machine knocking on their doorstep to bring them freedom in the form of bullets and nuclear weapons. Now, during what is today regarded as the most brutal war in all of human history, there of course was your fair share of propaganda being flung around on all fronts and from all sides, of the most exciting and cinematic conflict to ever take place. 2 such examples of these mid-20th century female ASMR dominatrixes are that of Axis Sally and Tokyo Rose. Axis Sally, whose real name was Mildred Elizabeth Gillers, was an American woman who relocated to Germany and was later on hired by the Nazis to spread Axis propaganda during the war. Born in the year 1900 with the surname Sisk in Portland, Maine, her father and mother divorced when she was around 10 to 11 years old. Her mother would later remarry to a dentist named Robert Bruce Gillers, from where Mildred would get her new surname. She dropped out of studying dramatic arts from the Ohio Wesleyan University in 1918, after which she moved to New York but struggled to establish a full-time theatrical career. With her dreams of becoming a stage actress fully in the dumps, she then moved to France and later on Algeria for a time, until finally ending up in the newly Nazi-controlled Germany in 1934 as an English teacher. In 1940, she was hired as a radio broadcaster and announcer at the Reichsrundfunkgesellschaft, or RRG state-sponsored radio station, which was primarily established to spread Nazi government propaganda. By 1941, the US State Department was advising American nationals to leave Germany and German-controlled territories. However, Mildred chose to remain because her fiancé at the time, Paul Carlson, who was a naturalized German citizen, said he would never marry her if she returned to the United States, since by this time Germany was officially enemies with the US as well, who had joined the war effort on the side of the Allies, which included Britain and France, just to mention a few. Unfortunately though, shortly after his nationalistic demands of Mildred, Carlson was sent to the Eastern Front to fight against the Soviets, where he was killed in action.
Oh no! What happened? Oh no, how terrible! That's just awful! How terrible! Oh no!
Despite the death of her love though, Mildred still continued to be a useful pawn of the Nazi Party, disseminating propaganda through radio broadcasts, and would form a relationship with one of the program directors at the RRG radio station named Max Otto Koischwitz. Thanks to her hardcore anti-American, anti-Jewish and anti-British stances she took during her broadcasts, she would earn a handful of nicknames among Allied soldiers, and especially American GIs, which included the Bitch of Berlin, Berlin Babe, Olga and Sally, this last one later evolving into the more commonly used Axis Sally. This nickname probably came about when asked on air to describe herself, to which Gillis responded by saying she was the Irish type, a real Sally. Her traitorous American lover, Max Koischwitz, died in August 1944 of heart failure, after which Mildred's broadcasts started to become lackluster and repetitive. She remained in Berlin until the end of the war. Her last broadcast was on the 6th of May 1945, just 2 days before the surrender of Germany, and she was finally arrested in 1946 by the Counterintelligence Corps of the American Army. Gillis was indicted on September the 10th, 1948, and charged with 10 counts of treason, but only 8 were used at her trial, which began on January the 25th, 1949. The prosecution relied on the large number of her programs recorded by the Federal Communications Commission, stationed in Silver Hill, Maryland, to show her participation in propaganda activities directed at the United States.
Good evening, women of America. Well, you know, as time goes on, I think of you more and more. I can't somehow seem to get you out of my head. You women in America, waiting for the one you love, waiting and weeping in the secrecy of your own room, thinking of the husband, the son, or the brother, who is being sacrificed by Franklin D. Roosevelt, perishing on the fringes of Europe.
It was also shown that Gillis had taken an oath of allegiance to Adolf Hitler, and when her trial finally ended in 1949, she would spend the next 11 years in prison, only finally being allowed parole in 1961. Despite her conviction and prison time, she remained extremely unapologetic about her association with the former German fascist regime, and even kept a cup which she alleged was given to her by Heinrich Himmler, the head of the German SS. She died in 1988 of colon cancer at the ripe old shriveled age of 88 years.
Eat dirt and die, trash.
There was another woman who also went by the alias of Axis Sally during the Second World War, an American-Italian woman named Rita Zucca, who worked on the side of the Italian fascists under Benito Mussolini, primarily broadcasting shit talk to Allied troops stationed in both Italy and North Africa.
You ain't shit, American GI.
The main difference with this Sally is that her case seems to be a little more sympathetic, in that, unlike Mildred, she didn't willingly become a propaganda mouthpiece for the Italian fascists, but instead was sort of forced to renounce her American citizenship in 1938 to save her family's Italian property from expropriation by Mussolini's government. Though by the 1940s, it does seem as if she began to accept and even enjoy her new role as a propagandist for the Italian fascists, often starting her broadcasts with "Hello suckers" and signing off with "A sweet kiss from Sally."
Whoa, mama!
Her broadcasts sometimes used intelligence provided by the German embassy in Rome in an attempt to confuse Allied troops. On July 8, 1943, the night before the invasion of Sicily, Zucca's broadcast told the wonderful boys of the 504th Parachute Regiment that Colonel Willis Mitchell's Playboys at the 61st Troop Carrier Group are going to carry you to a certain death. We know where and when you are jumping, and you will be wiped out. As the Allied armies advanced into Rome, Zucca retreated north with the Germans in 1944 and resumed broadcasting from Milan. By then Zucca was also pregnant, and her son was born on December 15th of 1944 as well. She returned to the microphone 40 days later and continued until her final broadcast on the 25th of April 1945, after which she would be identified and arrested just 3 months later in July of that same year. It was difficult for US authorities to prosecute her due to the fact that she was forced to renounce her American citizenship before she began broadcasting for Mussolini's fascist government. Therefore, she couldn't be tried on any counts of treason against the US. She was eventually shipped back to Italy in 1946, where she did end up getting tried by an Italian military tribunal for being a fascist collaborator during the war, and while she was sentenced to 4 years in prison, she only ended up serving 9 months, due to the Italian government deciding to grant amnesty to former collaborators. However, due to her ties to Mussolini's brutal regime, she was barred from ever returning to the United States, and lived out the rest of her days in relative obscurity in Italy until her death in 1998. Then there was the smooth-talking and soothing voice of one Tokyo Rose, who talked smack about US soldiers across the Asian airwaves. In the Pacific, with many an American GI hearing the sexy-sounding Japanese seductress verbally abusing them constantly while stationed in China, Japan, and the Philippines. The only real problem with Tokyo Rose, however, is that nobody knows who she or they really were, since there were multiple accounts from actual troops on the ground of there being more than one woman broadcasting Japanese military propaganda to demoralize the Allied armies stationed in the Far East.
Hello, Yankee brothers. This is your Japanese sister, the voice of truth.
Get Tokyo Rose.
Reaches out to you from the peacefulness of Japan, laden as always with love, but today also with sorrow, because of what your superiors are making you do. This morning they are forcing you to attempt the impossible.
Is that Tokyo Rose?
Brothers?
Yeah, I guess so.
The impossible.
And no accent.
For it is impossible for you to dislodge our forces on Iwo Jima.
But this did not stop the arrest and trial of an American-born Japanese woman, Iva Toguri, who, while she did unwillingly participate in anti-Allied propaganda for a radio show called The 0 Hour, she largely became a scapegoat for anti-Japanese sentiment during and after the war. Her story was literally a series of unfortunate events that happened in succession. She traveled to Japan to visit a sick aunt just before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and after this critical incident and the US declaration of war against Japan, Toguri became stranded in Tokyo since she couldn't stay with her aunt due to being an American citizen, and she also couldn't return home since her parents were placed in Japanese internment camps. This then forced her to reluctantly accept a job at Radio Tokyo, where she initially started working as a typist, but was eventually promoted to being a radio host for the aforementioned propaganda program titled The 0 Hour, where she would take the mic under the name of Orphan Anne, though it must be stated that the show's producer, who was an Australian prisoner of war named Major Charles Cousins, who was forced to participate under threat of execution, worked together with Ms. Toguri to sabotage many of the broadcasts by adding in subtle hints of sarcasm and mockery that many Japanese listeners were unable to understand, which led some Allied soldiers to believe that maybe Tokyo Rose was actually on their side. When the war ended, an American magazine reporter in Japan identified the now married Iva Toguri de Aquino as the infamous Tokyo Rose. US Army authorities arrested her on suspicion of treason, but let her go when the FBI and the Counterintelligence Corps decided that there wasn't enough evidence to warrant prosecution. On returning to the States, however, she was swept up in a media frenzy of anti-Japanese sentiment and retried, after which in 1949 she was convicted on one account of treason and sentenced to prison. However, nearly 3 decades later in 1977, President Gerald Ford granted her a full pardon after it was revealed by investigative journalists that some of these witnesses had admitted that they were forced to lie during the testimony. They stated that the FBI and US occupation police had coached them for more than 2 months about what they should say on the stand, and that they had been threatened with treason trials themselves if they did not cooperate. About 4 years later, we would see the same trend of female radio hosts spouting anti-American propaganda in the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to about 1953, when Commie leader Kim Il-sung, the grandpappy of Kim Jong-un, felt a little overconfident since he was backed by both China and the Soviets, and decided to invade the US-controlled and kinda democratic with dictatorship-light South Korea. In this war, there would be yet another woman who would mommy-dom the crap out of American GIs fighting the good fight against communist aggression.
Freedom is the sovereign right of every American. Democracy is non-negotiable.
2 nicknames that were used were Pyongyang Sally and Seoul City Sue, though I'm not entirely sure if they were the same person or 2 different people, since not much information exists about a Pyongyang Sally. However, Seoul City Sue seems to have yet again been another American traitor by the name of Anna Wallace Sue.
They are everywhere.
However, just like in the cases of Tokyo Rose and the Italian Axis Sally, Anna Wallace Sue's situation was a tad bit complicated, and another example of life just handing you a shit ton of lemons, too much for you to even make lemonade with, not to mention being caught up in way too many major historical events happening in rapid succession. Anna Wallace Sue was born in the year 1900 in Arkansas, United States of America, and in 1930, after graduating from the Scarrett College for Christian Workers in Nashville with a BA in ministry, would go on to become a Methodist Christian missionary working in a then-occupied Korea, which had become colonized and part of the Japanese Empire way back in 1910. At this point, however, she wasn't able to get much ministry work done due to the fact that the Japanese colonial administration having banned any sort of religious proselytizing, thus forcing all Western Christian missions to simply engage in charity work through education, food initiatives, medical aid, and care for the poor. In 1938, due to crackdowns on Western evangelical work in Korea by the Japanese authorities, Anna would move to China and begin working at the Shanghai American School, where she would meet and later on marry a Korean national by the name of Seo Kyo-chul. In 1943, during World War II, she and her husband would become temporarily separated, as she would be interned at the Cha Pei Civilian Relocation Center, with the rest of the foreign staff employed at the Shanghai American School, with her husband being allowed to stay since he was considered a Japanese colonial subject. After the war ended, she and her husband were reunited and decided to relocate to a now liberated Korea, where she tutored children at the US Diplomatic Mission School in Seoul. Her employment was terminated after her husband was investigated for left-wing activities under the regime of the strongly anti-communist South Korean President Syngman Rhee. In 1950, the North Korean People's Army stormed across the 38th parallel, the dividing line between the two Koreas, separating the Soviet-occupied North and American-occupied South after World War II, and quickly took control of the city of Seoul 3 days after the start of hostilities and Kim Il-sung's declaration of war. The speed of the advance caught the majority of residents by surprise and unprepared to evacuate. This sudden and absolutely shitty situation left the Sues trapped and unable to flee. Thus, with no other choice and being at the mercy of the communists, they pledged their allegiance to the North Korean regime. Under Dr. Lee Soo, an English instructor from Seoul University, Anna Wallace Soo began announcing for the North Korean Radio Seoul from the Korean Broadcasting System's HLKA studios, with daily programs from 9:30 a.m. to 10:15 p.m. local time. First heard as early as July 18th of 1950. Many of Sue's defenders gave the dull tone of her broadcasts as proof that she was being forced to make them against her will by the communists. Her initial scripts suggested that American soldiers return to their corner ice cream stands, criticized the US Air Force bombing campaign, and reported names recovered from the dog tags of dead American soldiers to a background of soft music. The GIs stationed in Korea gave her various nicknames, including Rice Ball or Rice Bowl Maggie, Rice Ball Kate, and Seoul City Sue, with this latter name sticking for the duration of the war. Throughout the rest of the summer of 1950, her reports would announce the names of recently captured US airmen, Marines and soldiers, threaten new units arriving in the country, welcome warships by name as they arrived on station, or taunt African American soldiers regarding their limited civil rights at home. Her monotone on-air delivery and the lack of popular music programming evidently left Sue's broadcasts less enjoyable for her intended audience when compared to the German and Japanese English language radio shows during World War II. When the city of Seoul was recaptured by UN forces in 1951, she and her husband were relocated by the retreating North Korean army to Pyongyang, where she would continue her radio propaganda work throughout the rest of the war. Fellow US-born army defector Charles Robert Jenkins made several claims about Sue in his book, The Reluctant Communist. He reported that sometime after the war, she was put in charge of English language publications for the North Korean Central News Agency, as well as claiming in his book that he saw her in a photo for a 1962 propaganda pamphlet called I Am a Lucky Boy, dining with yet another US Army defector named Larry Allen Abshire. Jenkins reported meeting her briefly in 1965 at the foreigners only section of the No. 2 department store in Pyongyang, but would later on also go on to state that he was told in 1972 that Sue had been executed after being accused as a South Korean double agent in 1969. The last and final propaganda radio host who I'd like to take a look at would be that of Hanoi Hannah, who in my opinion seems to be the most famous of the bunch, and who may or may not be justified in her actions depending on your view of the Vietnam War.
Good morning, Vietnam!
Her real name was... how the fuck... Okay, I'm definitely going to butcher the crap out of this pronunciation because Vietnamese is intense. But here goes. Her real name was Trinh Thi Ngo, and she was born in the year 1931 in Hanoi, Vietnam, which back then was a part of the French colonial territory called Indochina, which not only included Vietnam but also parts of Cambodia and Laos as well. Because her name is extremely difficult for me as a South African Englishman to pronounce, I will simply stick to calling her Hannah after her nickname for the remainder of this video. When she was young, Hannah was a massive fan of early Hollywood films and gained a desire to learn how to speak English so that she could watch some of her favorite black and white movies without subtitles. As a result of this, her parents arranged for her to have private lessons in English, and she soon came to master the language. In 1955, when she was 24 years old, she joined the Voice of Vietnam radio station and was chosen to read the English language newscast aimed at listeners in Asia's English-speaking countries. One of her tutors and mentors at the station was Australian journalist Wilfred Burchett. At this time, she adopted the alias Thu Hoang, which means autumn fragrance, as it was easier and shorter for her non-Vietnamese listeners. Now, after the Vietnamese gained independence from France by literally kicking their baguette-loving asses in the 1950s and sending them packing, a new conflict started to brew in the small nation of resilient rice farmers that knew their way with an AK-47, with communist forces in the north being backed by your usual suspects, the Soviet Union and China, and democratic dictatorship forces in the south being backed by your other usual suspects, the United States and NATO. The Vietnam War officially kicked off between the two sides as early as 1955, a mere months after the end of the French Indochina War. But it would only be in 1964 when America would enter the conflict to assist their Vietnamese allies in the south against the communist forces in the north, who sought to unite the two sides of this divided nation under the banner of that heavily misinterpreted ideology invented by German soy boy Karl Marx. During the Vietnam War, Ngo became famous among US soldiers for her broadcasts on Radio Hanoi. Ngo wrote the scripts alongside the People's Army of Vietnam, then translated them into English. They were intended to frighten and shame the soldiers into leaving their posts and turning against their commanding officers. She made 3 broadcasts a day, reading a list of newly killed or imprisoned Americans and playing popular US anti-war songs in an effort to incite feelings of nostalgia and homesickness, and attempting to persuade US GIs that the US involvement in the Vietnam War was unjust and immoral. US Navy ships and personnel were also targeted in her broadcasts, with Ngo reading out the names of crew members and saying that they were all going to die.
GI, your government has abandoned you. They have ordered you to die, GI. Do not trust them. Defect, GI. It is a very good idea to leave a sinking ship. They lie to you, GI. You know you cannot win this war. Your rich leaders grow richer while you die in the swamp, GI. They will give you a medal, GI, but only after you are dead.
She also received and played recorded messages from Americans who were against the war, saying later that she thought these messages were the most effective of all, as Americans would more likely believe their own people rather than the adversary. Now, in Ngo's mind, she genuinely thought that not only was she doing the right thing to try and sway American soldiers in Vietnam into leaving the war, but she also held the belief that her tactics were actually working. However, in reality, she kinda became somewhat of a celebrity among the US Army GIs stationed there, to the point of many of them actually tuning in 3 times a day just to listen to her broadcasts, and some of them actually becoming hardcore fans. Little to no desertions even occurred among these soldiers as a direct result of her efforts, and if soldiers did desert, it was usually more to do with how fucked up and horrifying the war was. Even in cases of her being able to pinpoint the correct locations of troops or military bases, listed names of soldiers who died in battle, and even welcomed US Navy ships into port with their correct arrival details and the names of crew members. Rather than causing paranoia or fear among the men, they would instead toast to her and throw beer cans at the radio, with majority of military personnel stationed in Vietnam eventually giving her the nickname of Hanoi Hannah. Over time, Hannah would even become the subject of superstition among US servicemen, with there being exaggerated legends of her omniscience, with rumors that she would give clues about everything from specific future North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong attacks to soldiers' girlfriends cheating on them back home. When in reality though, most of her information came from publications such as the US military newspaper Stars and Stripes, and sometimes from North Vietnamese military intelligence. Hanoi Hannah's admiration and fascination among what was essentially her enemy grew to such a degree that American soldiers even started to tune into her daily radio broadcasts for actual information about events taking place back in their home country as well, and even trying to sift through the propaganda for legit military-related information, sometimes even going so far as to plan battle strategies based on her bulletins, since they began to grow extremely distrustful of any and all American sources of information during the war, especially those from the US Armed Forces radio bulletins, who they believed were far more censored than those of Hannah's broadcasts. It wasn't so much that she was more truthful. She wasn't, since she was on the side of the enemy. It's just that when she did happen to tell the truth based on information from independent and investigative American newspapers, they were able to make out a clear distinction compared to what the US Armed Forces radio's highly exaggerated and censored broadcasts were saying. Hannah's broadcasts ran for a total of 8 years, with her final broadcasts airing in 1973, when most of the American forces were leaving. In interviews in her later years, she consistently stated that she agreed with the purpose of the scripts and never deviated from them. She believed that the United States should not have sent troops to Vietnam and should have allowed the country to resolve its situation by itself. This sentiment is echoed in one of her many broadcasts during the war, which is quoted as follows.
How are you, G.I. Joe? It seems to me that most of you are poorly informed about the going of the war, to say nothing about a correct explanation of your presence over here. Nothing is more confused than to be ordered into a war to die or to be maimed for life without the faintest idea of what's going on.
In 1975, after the fall of Saigon City and the war finally ending, Hanoi Hannah, or rather Trinh Thi Ngo, then moved to Ho Chi Minh City with her husband. She was then offered a job on HTV, a Vietnamese state-sponsored TV and radio network, where she would continue to work and live for the rest of her days. She died in Ho Chi Minh City on September the 30th, 2016, at the age of 85.
American GI, go home to your girlfriend before she cheats on you with next door neighbor, and you become #1 cockboy.
And there you have it, folks. Those are 5 historical female radio broadcasters who during wartime would propaganda podcast the absolute crap out of their enemies by attempting to ASMR mommy-dom them into surrendering. Truth be told, I got the inspiration for this episode from Count Dankula here on YouTube, who did a whole episode on Hanoi Hannah, which I will link to below if any of you are interested in learning more about her story specifically. Thank you once again for watching, and if you like my content, please do consider subscribing, since I release brand new episodes every Friday, featuring classic retro games from the 90s and early 2000s, as well as various interesting topics ranging from world history, science, politics, mythology, conspiracy theories, and much more. Anyway, have a great weekend, and I'll see you all in the next one. Salagashle.
Shut the hell up. I'm not playing with you, son of a bitch. I will beat the shit out of you anytime you feel a baby. I'm not playing with you. Fuck you up. I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. Shit for you ugly. Your mama is ugly. Everybody is ugly. You ugly. fat ass, ugly, shut the fuck up. You suck, go suck a dick and a banana, cause that is all you are.